Hello and welcome back to The Editorial, the podcast where we talk about why we're such silly little boys. This week I'm with Zach Michaelis.
I didn't know that was going to be the intro. This is feels.
I thought I'd catch you out. I thought I'd catch you out.
Weird. I'm going to have to apologise for being a silly little boy straight to camera. This is a completely different sort of video. Okay, yeah. Let's just
listening.
Let's move
you were
on.
On your laptop. I couldn't tell that you were paying attention, so I thought I'd throw it out there.
Straight past that and into the actual editorial. So the last time we did this, it was 3 weeks ago. I think we did suggest at the last one that it might be difficult to do one in 2 weeks' time because I was away, or at least
How was your trip?
Really, really lovely actually. We went to Devon with the baby. The baby loved Devon, which was very sweet. And babies generally mean you can't really holiday outside the UK. I think that's what I've learned so far.
Yes.
But really, really lovely. Thank you to the in-laws. If you're watching this,
I'm sure they will be.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway,
they're one of the 9 people that watch it.
Let's get straight into it. So the last one we did was basically 3 weeks ago, almost on the dot. So the last one we did was on the 30th of July, maybe the 31st, and it is today, the 21st of August. And basically, this should be quite a quick editorial. I'm going to do global UK business first because there's very little to say on those, and then we're going to do EU, and there's a lot more to say on EU, which is probably a bad thing for EU, but let's start with global.
Okay.
So global, as regular viewers will know, we address videos that normally have a like-dislike ratio below the sort of average, which is about 96, 96.5. There are a handful of videos that fall beneath that threshold. Basically, every Kamala Harris / US video falls beneath that threshold.
Sure.
But that is not because there are errors in those videos. I've looked through all of them. Maybe if someone could tell me if there's anything that they've seen, but I really actually couldn't see any errors in those videos. There seems to be a suggestion in one of them about the Gen Z one, why Kamala is so popular with Gen Z. There's a suggestion that we call Donald Trump the incumbent. We actually call him the Republican. It's just Ben is speaking quite fast. But so there's no error there. There's some pushback against the use of Kamala. People suggesting that is sort of sexist in using her first name while we would say Trump or you would say Biden. I don't really buy into that. I mean, in the UK, for instance, we call Boris. It's Boris Johnson, Boris. It's to my mind, it is sort of arbitrary how politicians get nicknamed by the public. I don't think whether or not they get sort of nicknamed or referred to by their first name or surname is symptom of sexism or racism, one of those sort of things. I just do think it's sort of arbitrary. I think we only use Kamala in the thumbs. We actually do, sort of just for consistency's sake, use Harris in the videos themselves, or Kamala Harris. But I don't actually think there's too much wrong with that. I don't want to get into too much of an argument about that. Maybe I should have prepared more words on that. But I think I don't think that's symptomatic of a sort of an industry-wide sexism or a sexism within our company. And I think we will continue to use Kamala on thumbs. I just think it's more recognisable.
I think that is the main reason why. It's kind of the nickname thing, as you say. We would have used Boris rather than Johnson in a thumbnail, probably. Someone can check the tapes. I might be wrong on that. But I think we tend to use the thing we think is most recognisable because we want people to be grabbed by the thumbnail. It's kind of the point of a thumbnail. And
people also have this similar argument about the Boris thing. They always said you shouldn't call him Boris. Alistair Campbell makes it the whole time. Yeah, it's humanising, whatever. I don't have a qualm with that either. I don't really believe. I think a lot of this sort of like obsession with language, and I think I'm going to invite some controversy here, but this is just sort of my take.
Oh no, being the editorial on the editorial.
I don't want a meta-editorial, but the obsession with language, it feels so deeply unscientific to me in lots of ways. Like I think sort of inferring implicit biases from very specific uses of language, or like worrying too much about the sort of like normalizing or sort of non-normalizing, abnormalizing effects of specific words. It's sort of very like neo-Freudian. It's very sort of like 19th century. It's sort of like, to me, it feels like a hangover from sort of bad early psychotherapy. It's sort of, there's the whole Freudian thing of inferring from your specific word choices or word associations what your sort of deep meaning or deep thinking is. I just don't really buy into that like worldview.
Sure.
Sorry.
I look forward to discussing it on next week's editorial.
Tell me if I'm wrong.
This becomes the most contentious video of the week.
UK, there is one video with a low dislike, which is can you really go to prison for a tweet? Today's video, 94%. There actually doesn't seem to be anything people are irritated about the video itself. It's just that they're angry with the government for putting people in prison for tweets, which is fair.
I mean, it's fair. It's a bit rude to dislike our video for it.
I agree.
Because I think that's some kind of vote against the system. We're not forwarding this to the government. They won't know.
We can have a word with Big Keir, but
next time we see
Mr.
Keith,
Starmer, rather.
We'll let him know.
That's another good example of the sort of first name, surname thing. Anyway, the business pushback on the Has Elon Ruined Twitter X video, which has a dislike of about 90.
Guaranteed. Mention Elon on Twitter.
This is true.
It's exactly the same as the UK one.
Yeah. I think there's some pushback, people who like Musk or who disagree that he's done a bad thing to Twitter. I understand that if you've just looked at the thumbnail or title, but the actual thesis of the video is not that he's made it bad in a normative sense.
Sure.
It's actually that it's been bad for its business model, which I think is hard to dispute, actually.
I think even if you support his kind of
and that's
right-wing libertarian ideology, his business practices haven't supported that platform to enable the spread of that ideology.
And we should say there's literally that caveat in the video. There's a point where we go, even if you agree with this sort of politics, it's nonetheless true to say it's been bad for its business model, which is just true. I do take one point though, which is, and I don't think we actually made this point in the video, but I think it is worth stressing, is that it's important not to romanticize pre-Elon Twitter. Pre-Elon Twitter still had its flaws.
Oh, and the business has always been terrible.
Yeah, and there's a lot of discourse about he's ruined it, but I think a lot of that forgets that actually there was a lot wrong with Twitter back in the day. So those are those three channels.
Can I just ask, we're moving to EU. We had an Elon video on EU too.
Yeah.
Are we having a triple Elon? Is this a triple Elon episode?
But before, unfortunately...
Okay. Before we get to the juicy bit.
So on EU, so just to recap that, I don't think we actually had anything necessarily wrong. Oh, the last one, actually, I've just forgotten this. On Global, there was an Israel economy video about its debt downgrade, which was 96% basically, so it's a tiny bit below threshold. Again, there were no errors there. It's just in a sort of similar way to Elon, just anything Israel related just does go down. I think it was people basically, some people were pushing back against some of the language we use to describe Israeli history, or sort of Israel-Palestine history. In 1948, we say sort of Israel gained independence. People were pushing back against that because, in what sense did they gain independence? We're sort of brushing over. I don't think we are, but we're brushing over the sort of treatment of Palestinians there. And then on the other side, there were sort of Israelis saying you're catastrophizing the Fitch downgrade was politically motivated.
Yes, okay.
And the Israeli economy is doing really, really well. So those two groups combined just bring things down. On sort of not the extremes, I'm not saying that pejoratively, but the extremes on the other side for any Israel video just do bring that dislike ratio down a little bit. So just to recap then, global UK business, I don't think really anything wrong for the last 3 weeks.
No apologies.
No, I don't think, no apologies, which is confident. But EU, on the other hand, I have 8 videos in the last 3 weeks.
How many apologies?
Oh, I think there are definitely going to be a couple of apologies.
We'll counter on screen.
And I'm going to do this chronologically. So the sort of video furthest away chronologically, the one that was released earliest that we need to address is why tensions between Italy and EU are rising again. This is entirely my fault, and this is an apology, straight up apology. I'm sorry. I describe the super bonus as Maloney's super bonus. This is intensely silly from me. I have been a silly boy.
Oh no!
Because I can't believe I made this mistake. I mean, literally in the video we say that it was introduced in 2021. That would mean it could not have been passed by Maloney. She came to power in late 2022. It was in fact passed by the Conte government. Maloney is one of its most vocal critics. So that is just entirely my bad. I'm sorry about that. And I think that tarnished what was otherwise quite a good video, which is annoying and entirely my bad. So again, just a big apology there. Why Europe's economy is doing better than you think? 96%. I think that's just because it does very well views-wise. And, that sort of pulls in some less loyal viewers, as it were. There's a lot of people just disputing this idea that Europe is doing all right. I mean, I think 2 things are true there. I mean, the gist of the video is better than you think.
Sure.
And that's just, of course,
that's a caveat.
It's entirely relative, isn't it? And I just think that it was supposed to be a sort of corrective to some more extreme doom mongering that you hear about in the media. There were no pushing back against the errors. I mean, you can have quite an academic debate about the sort of right metric to use. So basically in the video we say that sort of dollar rebased GDP per capita or GDP is not the best way of comparing economies because of the strength of the dollar, which is determined not by sort of normal trade flows, but by basically demand for reserve assets, because the dollar is the global reserve currency. And so we instead look at basically purchasing power adjusted. So that's sort of like how much your currency can buy you in its sort of native territory. You adjust it in those terms, and then you adjust it for hours worked and population, because the American population grows faster than most European countries, and the Americans work longer hours. So when you adjust for that, then all of a sudden things do look a bit more favourable. America still comes out sort of on top. I mean, depends quite how you, but you can have an academic dispute about like, what is that the right metric? You know what I mean? And like, it depends on like how different states collect that data and all that sort of shenanigans. Again, I don't want to say anything too absolute. I'm not necessarily saying that particular measure is the optimum measure and that we should ignore GDP or anything like that. I'm just saying that, like, one of these measures is particularly unflattering, and one of these measures looks a bit better. So, even if you sort of just weight that measure, give some weight to that measure, the purchasing power adjusted per hour measure, then things do look at least a little bit better than if you'd given sort of full weight and exclusive total focus on just GDP.
Sure. There
we go. So I don't think there's anything to apologise for there.
Okay.
How Orban wants to make Europe great again, that comes in at about 95. There's some sort of general anti-Orban pushback there, which fair enough if you're into that. But then there's another issue, which is a classic pronunciation issue. It's Fidesz, not Fidesz.
Okay.
And that is frustrating. We keep getting those wrong, but there you go. That is an apology. We're sorry about that. We'll try and make that better in the future. The Musk one, could the EU ban Twitter? 94.4. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with this video. It's just that people don't like us sort of like apparently having to go at Musk, even though we're not. We were really literally just articulating the sort of European position.
Sure.
And the ongoing spat between Musk and the EU. So no apology there, I don't think. Will Maloney's devolution plan for Italy backfire? This one had a 98.1% like-dislike ratio, namaste Naja. But there were a couple of tiny errors which I should have caught as editor. At 3:35, we say the election capitulated Maloney. That was a sort of those classic autocorrect things. It actually should have been catapulted.
Sure.
So yeah, apologies. Sorry for that. That's our bad. And then at 6:20, there is this is an old school sort of TLDR animation error. Rome is spelt Rom. R-O-M. I know.
Where'd the ego?
It's a bit of a throwback though,
isn't
it?
It's cute. I like it. It's harmless. Don't apologise.
It's not harmless. I am apologising. Sorry about that. We should have done better there. Why is the EU so soft on Serbia? That has 94%. There are a couple of errors in here. I have to apologise for it again. We say Rio Tinto is Anglo-American when it's Anglo-Australian. That is such a silly error. I think it is on my part. I didn't write this, I edited it though. I think it's because Anglo-American is itself a mining company that Rio Tinto, I think, is looking into acquiring. And I just sort of got those two thoughts confused in my head. And that's not an excuse, explanation, not an excuse. I'm sorry for that. And then we also say that Serbia is the only candidate country not to sanction Russia. That's not true either. I don't know where that came from. Technically, the oldest and newest candidate countries, Turkey and Georgia respectively, also haven't done this, although Turkey, whether or not it counts, is sort of an open question because its negotiations have been frozen since 2018. But it's at least true to say that Georgia is a candidate country and also has not sanctioned Russia. So that original claim that Serbia was the only candidate country not to sanction Russia is not true. So apologies for that as well. More generally, I think this ratio is there's pushback from both sides again. There's pushback from people saying that the EU is soft on Serbia. Because there's people basically saying that what do we mean by that? What right does the EU have to sort of punish Serbia in those terms? And then there's also people saying that the EU has sort of should be punishing Serbia, but we weren't being sufficiently harsh on it. Does that make sort of sense?
Yeah.
I don't think I've articulated that very well, but basically I think there was some pushback against the general idea that the EU is soft on Serbia. And then there was also some pushback against the use of Kosovo as a sort of point of comparison. We were only using Kosovo to demonstrate that the EU is otherwise willing to sanction countries.
Okay.
We weren't trying to invite too much attention to the sort of like comparison between the EU's treatment of Serbia and Kosovo. It was just in the context of imposing sanctions.
Okay.
I think there's also some pushback because we were saying that the conclusion is that the EU is sort of being at least sort of nominally hypocritical or not living up to its stated values. I think that is sort of true, but there are some people saying that like you shouldn't really expect the EU to live up to its like stated values. You know, the EU is after all a sort of political agent. Political agents are fundamentally motivated by interests rather than values, and you shouldn't get too hung up on values. I get that, that's fair, but then I think you have to at least acknowledge that there was an inconsistency with the way the EU, or at least the Commission, talks about the EU as a sort of values-based organisation, and then doesn't always live up to it.
Sure.
So then finally, why the far left is surging in Germany. This is about Bundeswahlrecht, which is the Saar-Wagenknecht alliance. That's about 90%. That's really quite low for us. And that is just exclusively opposition to the term far left. Fair. We are just ahead of time. We are going to do a separate editorial specifically on the use of the terms far right and far left.
Because a special edition.
I know. Every time we use these, I know, but it's crazy. But every time we use these terms, we do get some pushback. We explain her policy platform in the video. I am, teasing what I'm going to say in that podcast. I'm actually very sympathetic to the idea that far left is not an appropriate term. I mean, both the Financial Times and The Economist, who are sort of in many ways, I guess, our gold standard for journalistic, journalism generally, and journalistic terminology, they have both used those terms. But I am sympathetic to the idea that far left is not a good description of the Saar-Wagenknecht's politics. In brief, she is sort of quite left on economic issues, but actually on social issues, quite right, insofar as that sort of left-right dichotomy even applies.
Sure.
But yes, I take that point. But again, we do explain her politics in the video, and there doesn't seem to be any pushback against the way we've described her politics. It's just that particular sort of like overall label. Anyway, the next one, 3 reasons joining the EU might not always be a great idea. Again, it's about 90%, really, really quite low. This does seem to motivate the fact that people are basically just saying that they think that joining the EU is a good idea. That is not the point of the video. I hope we made this clear. I mean, the point of the video is just about specifically, the potential downsides. As we say in the video, like multiple times, we're not saying that joining the EU is in the aggregate a bad idea, but it's not unalloyed good. It's not. There are potential downsides.
Sure.
There was some more specific pushback against the brain drain argument. The point that there's sort of 2 related objections to this argument. People were saying that brain drain happens even to countries who aren't in the EU. So like Serbia, for instance, has suffered a degree of brain drain. And then there's also people saying that it doesn't, brain drain sure is, but it's a temporary phenomenon, and that people come back, and that's just in the aggregate good. So Poland is the best example of this. In the early 2000s, mid to late 2000s, a lot of Poles end up going to places like the UK, Germany, all that sort of thing. And that was temporarily pretty tough for the Polish, I'm going to say economy, but at least its demographics. But then lots of people end up returning, and its emigration rates started falling quite drastically, and so that was just in the end great. This is true. Maybe we should have put this caveat in the video, and maybe we should have caveated the brain drain stuff more aggressively generally. I will sort of give a sort of partial apology for that. Sorry about that. But it's not guaranteed, and I do think that let's just see what happens with, say, Croatia, or Romania, for instance. But yeah, so those, and I still think, again, the point was not that in the aggregate joining the EU is a bad idea. Again,
it's just these are the
potential downsides. Yeah, maybe we didn't caveat aggressively enough. I'm sorry if that's the case, but that's the brain drain thing is still a potential downside in that respect. So that is everything.
That's all of them.
Yeah.
apart from the far left, far right thing, which we've addressed lightly,
we'll be back
to next week.
But I still provisionally apologise for that as well. So sorry about that.
Okay.
I think far left was probably the wrong label, or at least we should have.
Okay, I'll count that on the tally list for.
Nice.
Apologies.
Okay, well, I think that's everything.
Amazing.
Nice. All right.
We'll see you again next week when we will discuss the far left and far right, or more specifically, us calling them that.